Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, remember you'll have a quiz for the next class, right? Today, we begin our discussion of modern architecture. And this afternoon, I'll be discussing a very general concept that is important for our understanding of modern architecture. As I discuss this concept, I'm going to give you a little background on modern architecture. Then later, I'll move on to focus on one giant architect of our times, and that's Frank Gehry. First, let me give you a tiny little bit of background on modern architecture. We all know that a building does more than simply give us shelter. We can all think of some buildings that are just really beautiful or really interesting. This tells us that sometimes architecture can also be art. Let me explain what I mean. Let's take a look at these famous buildings just to get an idea. Here's a building by the famous architect Antoni Gaudi. Take a look at this. Everyone loves this building. It's an apartment building, but from our point of view today, it certainly is more than just a shelter for people. It's also very pleasing to the eye. To me and many other people, it's very fun to look at. It's truly a work of art. Isn't it fabulous? Here's one of the tallest buildings in the world. It's a skyscraper in Taipei. It's called Taipei 101. Most people who see this building love it. Not because it's an office building and not only because it's so tall, it's also incredibly beautiful. Don't you think so? I think I've made my point that architecture has a purpose, but it's also something that can be very beautiful at the same time. It can please the eye. This is an important point. All right. This brings me to the key concept for today. In modern architecture, let's say architecture from 1900 to the present, there's been this big question. What is the relationship between a building's form and its function? This was the question asked by the world-famous American architect named Louis Sullivan. Sullivan believed quite strongly that form follows function. But what was Sullivan's point? Well, Sullivan wanted to say that the purpose of a building should tell the architect how to design the building. And consequently, people should be able to know what its purpose was just by looking at it. So, most architects agreed with Sullivan and followed his idea. For the next several decades, I want to move on to show you how architects have changed their attitude about form and function. This is very interesting. In the last, let's say, 25 years, many architects, many famous architects, have ignored what Sullivan said. They've chosen to go against the idea that form follows function. And they've built some fantastic buildings. This leads us to my favorite modern architect. And he's very famous for not believing that form follows function. His name is Frank Gehry. Let me show you his most famous design. This is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, in Spain. It's a very well-known museum. There's famous art inside, paintings and statues inside. But do you think this looks like a museum? I don't think so. Take a look at these curves. These round shapes. Gehry designed this, some people say, so there are no real corners, no straight lines, as you can see. When people visit the museum, what do they notice? They notice the shiny curves, the reflection of the water. But they might not immediately think, this is a museum. What I'm trying to show you here is that there is very little connection between the form of the building, all these curves, all the shiny metal, and the purpose of the building, to show the art to people. It's an art museum, but it doesn't really look like one. It's its own piece of art. Since we have a few more minutes, let's analyze another Frank Gehry building. Here it is. This building is very playful, very fun, and it really catches the eye. But I have a surprise for you. This is actually the Computer Science Research Center at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, the most famous university for science and technology in the world. So it's a very serious place. So again, we see Frank Gehry making a kind of game out of the whole form and function idea. He's being ironic, meaning he's actually doing the opposite of what he claims to be doing, designing a building for a serious purpose. You could say he's really twisted the form and function idea. And he's had a lot of fun along the way. This place is really crazy. I love it. I think I better wrap it up now. Next time, we'll focus on one type of modern building, the skyscraper. See you next week.